Good morning. First thing I'd like for you to do is take your hand, go like this, and put your chin back up and close your mouth. So I heard them all drop when you saw me coming up here. You know, I was once told it's best to keep your mouth shut and let people think you're a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. Sort of hard to do up here today. So bear with me. Remember, God also used a donkey to get his message across. So cut me some slack. First thing my son-in-law said to me was, remember, short and sweet. You gotta love family. Anyhow, I brought my notes, and that's not funny. Here's the rest of my notes, so you laugh at that. We're going to talk about Moses for a few minutes, if we could, today. You know, a lot of people compare me to Moses. That had to be family. No, not slow to speak and old. I'm part of that. But all my life growing up, people always kept saying to me, come on, Ulrich, you can go faster than that. You're slow as Moses. So that's why I compare myself to Moses. That's about the only thing I compare myself to Moses about. Moses had more patience than I would have had. Of course, I was a little bit like Moses because every time something came up and somebody wanted me to do something, I tried the best as I could to talk my way out of it. Sometimes you just don't feel like doing it. And other times you don't think you have the confidence or ability to do it. And that was my okay, Dean, I didn't think it was that funny. Josh will be back next week anyway, folks, so hang in there. Anyhow, Moses had a lot more patience. Moses perhaps didn't have the confidence that it took. And I lacked that my whole life. I don't know about any of the rest of you. How many of us were born and walked right away and talked right away and did everything? We were a little bit hesitant, weren't we? And as we grew up, we didn't get any encouragement. That didn't get any better, did it? And perhaps that's what this world is, what's wrong with this world today. People don't get the encouragement they need. Perhaps that's what's wrong with us. We need to encourage one another. We need to lift each other up. How often do we hear of constant tear-downs and bickering among people? And how often do we encourage someone? My message today is going to be from Exodus 4. It says, where God wants Moses to go and lead his people out, and Moses has already tried, I don't know how many times, and says, no, but Lord, you don't understand. I'm slow of speech. I'm not a good organizer. I can't do this. I can't do that. And yet God says, Moses, I want you to lead my people. How do you think Moses felt about that time? He didn't have the confidence to do anything, but God had the confidence. And God saw something in him that Moses didn't see in himself. You understand how Moses came up, his upbringing. Exodus 1, we see where Joseph and his family go to Egypt, and then the sons of the Israelites go to Egypt and travel to Egypt. There were 70 altogether at that time. They spent 400 years in captivity under the Egyptian rulers. And Joseph and his generation all passed away, and of course the king passed away, and the new one took over, And he didn't know anything about Joseph and his generations or anything about that. But the first thing that he did when he took over, he saw that the Israelites were going to be a problem. There's getting to be too many of them. Don't you imagine it was a problem before he became the king? Probably just didn't see it then, did he? But now that he was the ruler, things are different. How often do we have men in charge and women in charge that are a little different than what they were before they were in charge? You know, they're not the same, just something a little different about them. Anyhow, this ruler just started making up the rules. He said, well, what we're going to do, we're going to make them slaves. That way they'll be too busy, too tired for, to overtake us. So they made them slaves. And you got to understand, the Hebrews and the Egyptians were two different cultures. The Egyptians had just about anything as their gods. Frogs were their gods. Cattle were their gods. Everything else were their gods. The Hebrews had one God, worshiped one God only. The Egyptians were a cultured people. They were builders, pyramids and all these great buildings and things. The Hebrews were nomads and roamers. Completely different, weren't they? We can't understand how they even got together. And of course, the Egyptians had their culture and their cultural centers, and of course, the Hebrews had their little town of Goshen. No, not Goshen, Ohio, in Egypt. And finally, the ruler says, there's just getting to be too many of these people. So he called the midwives in and said, midwives, any Hebrew boy that's born, throw into the river. It's like catch and release, I guess, didn't. But I'm sorry, that wasn't, no, that wasn't good. Being a fisherman, that's the only thing I can come up with. But he told them, throw them into the river. Let the girls survive. That way we'll take care of them. Well, what is the purpose of a midwife anyway? Is it to destroy life and to kill people? No. Theirs is to keep them alive and help them nourish and grow. So that's what they did. They didn't listen to the king. And the king asked him once, and he said, why aren't you killing the boys? And the midwives came back and said, well, these Hebrew women are just too fast, and they have these babies and everything before we can even get there. We just can't do that. It just so happened the Levite family had a baby, and it was a boy. And the mother said it was a fine boy, a fine baby. Every mother thinks their baby's a fine baby, don't they? But anyhow, she kept the baby, and she hid him for 3 months. I'm not quite sure how you hide a baby for 3 months, but she hid him for 3 months. She couldn't hide him any longer. She decided, well, I'll make this little basket. And I got another joke. It's going to be bad, but here it comes. Moses was the first basket case. I don't know where that one came from, but like I say, Josh will be back. But anyhow, it just so happened that the Pharaoh's daughter just happened to be down by the Nile about the time that Moses' mother put him in the river, in the reeds there, so to be safe. And it's almost like a Hallmark movie, You know the beginning, you know the middle, and you know the end. Here it comes. Anyhow, Pharaoh's daughter finds him. And of course, Miriam, Moses' older sister, just happened to be there. She said, "Oh, do you want me to go get the mother so she can nurse the baby, until he grows?" And the Pharaoh's daughter said, "Yeah." So the mother and Miriam and the baby were all united again. They took him in to live at Pharaoh's house. And then the next thing you know, it says, and Moses, when he grew up, he was a man. He was in Pharaoh's house all this time and had the favor of, being one of Pharaoh's own. So he goes out one day, and he just happens to walk along and find an Egyptian beating up a Hebrew. I don't know about you, but when we are about to do something wrong, like a little kid with his hand in a cookie jar, before he opens that lid, before he puts his hand in that cookie jar, he looks all around, make sure nobody is looking, right? He gets his hand in that cookie jar, he gets the cookie, and yet mom still finds out somehow. But anyhow, Moses looked around, didn't see anybody, so he killed the Egyptian. Are you okay so far? Yeah. He buries the Egyptian, nothing of it. Very next day, he goes out walking again. By coincidence, he happens to see two Hebrews fighting amongst themselves. So he asked the Hebrew that was in the wrong, "How come you're beating up on your fellow Hebrew?" And of course, we all know these people. We have them in our lives every day sometimes. This Hebrew looks at him and says, "Who are you to judge me and rule over me? Are you going to kill me like you did the Egyptian yesterday?" How do you think that made Moses feel? Sort of scared him a little bit. So, and of course, shortly thereafter, Pharaoh just happened to find out. He wasn't too happy. He wanted to kill Moses. So this is, the life and story of Moses really gets interesting, doesn't it? And the next thing you know, Moses says, "Well, I can't hang around here anymore." So he takes off and he flees to Miriam. He gets to Miriam, he's at a well, taking a rest, probably relaxing. And of course, here come these women. And for some reason, women don't like to see men relaxing. I'm not getting anywhere with this, am I? Anyhow, the 7 daughters just happened to be the daughters of the priest of Miriam. They came to draw water for the flock for their father. Well, Moses sitting there and the 7 women trying to get the water, and here comes some shepherds. I told you it was a Hallmark movie. Here comes some shepherds. Scared the women away. Didn't get to get their water, didn't get to water the flocks. But Moses gets up and saves the day. He gets the water, he takes it, and he waters the flocks. I got to rest a minute. Anyhow, the daughters go home, and the father sees them. "Well, you're home early. How come?" And then they proceed to tell him, "Well, we went to the well to get water, and there was an Egyptian guy there, and he anyhow, he came and got the water and fed our flock, and all's well." And of course, being the priest, he said, "Well, where is this guy? Why don't you bring him home? We can let him have a meal with us." So the women went and got him, and of course, they brought him home. And the father welcomed him. Why not? Father welcomed him, and he somehow talked him into staying. We know where this has gone. Remember, he had 7 daughters. Hallmark movie. Anyhow, the priest winds up giving one of the daughter's hands to Moses in marriage. So, here's Moses again. Spends a long time with the family, feeding, tending the flock. He had the flock out in the desert one day, and somehow to get up to the mountains, and then to get up to the mountain of God, and Moses is standing there watching the flock, and he looks over and he sees this burning bush. And being Moses, he has to be curious. He has to go a little bit closer. Okay, so he gets closer and he notices that the bush is burning, but it's not being consumed. Have we ever seen a fire that burned and not consume anything? No, I don't think so, not in my lifetime. So anyhow, as Moses draws closer, a voice comes out of the bush. Moses, Moses, remove your sandals. You are standing on holy ground. He got enough to write a book right there, doesn't he? Anyhow, he goes on, and God tells him, he says, you're going to lead my people out, Moses. Moses keeps on insisting, I can't do this. I'm slow of speech, and I'm old. That God says, you will lead my people out. Okay. Excuse me a minute, I have to get a drink of water. Well, being up here isn't as easy as Josh makes it, But anyhow, yeah, it's been a while since I've been in the pulpit. You just have to excuse me for rambling on. I told you I was like Moses. I just didn't have much to talk about, but I say a lot. Anyhow, as God told him, he said, okay, you're going to go back. This is what I'm going to do. You're going to get your wife. You're going to get your family. You're going to go back to Egypt. You're going to talk to the rulers of Israel and tell them, the leaders of Israel, and tell them that you're going to lead them out. And Moses said, well, wait a minute, God. What if they don't believe me? We ever had somebody tell us that? Oh, I don't believe that, What if they don't believe me? God says, tell them I am who I am. And right away, that takes me back to my childhood, and I think of Popeye. I am who I am. And Moses so agrees, and so they go back, and in chapter 4 of Exodus, that took us from chapter 1 through chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Exodus now, Moses is still trying to get out of it. Moses said, what if you do not believe me or listen to me and say that the Lord did not appear to you? Then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And Moses replied, a staff. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Now, that's where Moses and I would part ways here, because as he threw it on the ground, it became a snake. At that point, I wouldn't have been around any longer. Because to me, anything longer than an earthworm is a snake. I'm sorry. That's it. That's just the way I'm built. I'm sorry. Anything bigger than that's a snake. And then if that wasn't enough, the Lord tells him, reach out and take it by its tail. And that's where Ray would say, my selective hearing is going to come into play right here, because I'd say, what's that, Lord? My wife said I'm good at that. Isn't that right? Amen? Yeah, that's about the only thing she's agreeing with me today on, so. That would be my selective hearing. But what does Moses do? It doesn't say he argued with him and it said Moses jumped back and ran away. Well, I'd still be running, I'm sorry. But he grabbed it by the tail and picked it up, and it was a staff, the staff again. And then he did another, he says, stick your hand in your cloak. Moses stuck his hand in his cloak, and he pulled it out, and it was leprous. And of course, leprosy was a bad thing back then. Then he stuck it back in, and everything was all good. So, all right. And it goes on from here then. Then the Lord said, the third thing he did was, in verse 8 it says, the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first miraculous sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water will become blood. Well, he had more patience than I would. Then he tells them to go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. In verse 13, Moses again says, oh Lord, please send somebody else to do this. Please send somebody else to do this. How often are we in situations where we don't think we can handle it? How often does God put us in a place or a position to do things and we hesitate? Lord, I don't want to go do that. Send Dean. Send Aaron. Send anybody else but me. I don't, just like that old song, General Custer. Please, Mr. Custer, I don't want to go. Well, us older folks who understand that song. The young ones, Google it. I can't explain that one either. But anyhow, as it goes on, then Moses does his darndest to try to get out of it, and no matter what it is, God's not listening to him. God saw something in Moses that he could use. You notice he didn't change Moses or try to do anything different. He used the old Moses just as he was. So oftentimes we think whatever we have in our hand, whether it's the gift of music, the girls get up there, I just love this, watching them sing. And our musicians get up here and they're so talented, and that's a gift from God. And we thank you for that. You don't want to hear me sing, for sure. Promise you on that one. But anyhow, what's in your hand? What gift do you have? Whether it's a gift of sewing, whether it's a gift of communicating, whether it's a gift of visitation, whether it's a gift of whatever, fill in the blanks. We all have something unique that we can do, and unique that is ours and ours only, and God can use that if we would stop being hesitant and let God do his thing. As I said before, I never grew up with a whole lot of encouragement from my coaches. I was a football manager for several years, and the head football coach and this his assistant, they're both teachers at the school, and of course I just happened to have them both in my class, and I don't think they liked me too much for some reason. I don't know why it was, but they always picked on me. They always said, I couldn't do anything right. I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. And before long you believe people, don't we? We believe that we can't do this. We believe that we can't handle this situation. You never know until you're put into that situation what we can and cannot handle. I've been handed so many things at different times. I stop and look back at them now. I said, how did I get through that? I had my dad's funeral in the morning. That afternoon, I had to do a wedding. From one emotion to another in one day. Different situations. I don't like going to hospitals. I don't like visiting in the nursing homes. I definitely don't like going to funeral homes. But sometimes when you're a pastor, you gotta do what you gotta do. It reminded me of a story of a pastor of a church one time. He gets the call that no pastor wants to get. I'll wrap up here in a minute, honest. No pastor wants to get in the middle of the night. He gets a phone call. It's from a parishioner of his. His teenage son was in a bad automobile accident. So he rushed to the hospital to be with him in the emergency room. And he remembers that night because he gets to the hospital and he just sits with the family. Nothing said. He just sits with the family. And of course, the doctors come out and say, we did everything we could, but he didn't make it. You don't remember saying a word to him. Anyhow, those people moved away, and a couple years later, the pastor just happened to be into the city where they moved to, and he thought, well, I'm going to go get a bite to eat. So he went to this restaurant, and lo and behold, who came walking in? His two former parishioners. And he was glad to see him, but the first thing they did when they saw him, they walked over to him, they shook his hand, and they said, we want to thank you for what you did for us that night at the hospital. And he sat there and he said, I didn't say anything. And what they say, you didn't have to, just being there. Sometimes we think we have to do extraordinary things, don't we, for God. Not everybody can get up here and preach. I'm proof of that. Like I say, Josh will be back next week. But whatever it is your talent is, don't be afraid to use it. I'd rather be made a fool for God than a fool for man. We all have talents. We don't have to have any special schooling, any special education to use that talent. As long as you're sincere with it, people will see that. People will recognize that. So what is it about you that's like Moses? He didn't have the ideal upbringing. It didn't look good for him for a while, but God used him, and God blessed him. He'll do the same for each and every one of us. There's a little bit of Moses in each of us. I mean that in a good way. So as I conclude today, I want you to ask God, Lord, what is it in my hand that I can use for you today? What is it? It may seem like an ordinary stick to you, but to someone, you can hand that stick and say, God bless you. And that's priceless. My talk today was what's in your hand. It reminded me of the commercial, the credit card commercial. What's in your wallet? Right now, not much, but okay. What's in your hands? What talent? It doesn't have to be outstanding. The talents of those who clean the building, who make sure the lights are on, the behind the scenes work. Use that talent. What's in your hands? I ask you to ask God that question and use what He has for you this day. You'll be surprised. Even if it's the littlest of things, it could be a blessing to somebody.